Hey everybody, how are you all doing? What's going on? I hope you're coping as best you can. This is just one of those moments. The entire world is on pause and we are distancing ourselves physically, but I think it's really important to explore how we can deepen connection, and I'm thankful that more and more people are talking about that. This moment where we kind of pause what we think is our everyday lives, and it creates a moment for us to kind of really think about what matters, you know? I want to talk to men in particular, but this is really open to anybody of any gender. But I just want to talk to the guys out there in particular as we do this social distancing, and we find ourselves in social isolation. And for some of us, that means being in spaces with our loved ones. That could be with our girlfriends, with our boyfriends, with our wives, our partners, and with our children. And, I think in any relationship, as a partner, as a husband, as a father, we all lose our cool, right? It's just natural. It's what it is. But what we do about that is what matters. And that's on any day, but especially in these moments where we are spending so much time indoors with our loved ones. We got the stresses of missing work, or feeling the need to kind of, how do I lead my family, or how do I support my partner, or how do I show or project strength, the pressures that we feel to get this moment right. I want to be a solution. I don't want to be part of a problem. And sometimes what happens is we think the idea of being a solution is to push down our problems and suppress them. And that sometimes makes things worse. There's always a time and a place. So I don't want to make this a lecture. I just want to talk with you, as someone who wants to just explore with other men, unpacking our stuff as guys. And not that I'm an expert on being a man, it's more that I want to talk about, how do we do this together? How do we, you know, figure this out, especially at a time like this, the role we can play and the kind of impact we want to have. So I want to tell you a couple of stories to kind of explain what I mean. So this is March 21st, Saturday, as I'm recording this. I want to take you back to Thursday, March 12th. These days, it feels like, every day feels like a year, doesn't it? So much happens. And March 12th feels like it's ages ago from today being March 21st. March 12th, I had two talks I was going to do. I had lined up for the day. This is just before the city of Toronto announced and really started to drill us with the concept that we now know of social distancing. I had two talks, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. The one in the morning was with the Catholic Family Services Children Aid Society, speaking to a lot of their frontline workers. The evening one was with the University of Toronto. I did talk about men and mental health, and not just self-care, but community care. How sometimes our idea of self-care is me working on me in isolation. But the reality is that, as men, we tend to be islands, right? Whether it's we are just very distant emotionally, or we want to figure things out on our own. Like, I got this, I'll solve this. So for us, self-care can be tricky because the idea is not to retreat into ourselves, because that's what we do all the time. We're like islands. And our idea of manhood sometimes ends up leaving us like we're stranded on islands, or that it can even become our own prison, right? So the idea for me is, like, as men, we need to really build community. And that means community care. Building community within us, like connecting all these things of who we are, our emotional, physical, spiritual health, but building community amongst one another as well. That means checking in with other men, people of all genders, but I think it's important for us as men, I think in this moment, to check in with other men, see how other men are doing in particular. Because when I've been doing this during this time, and needless to say, with women, the conversation really gets quickly to, here's how I'm feeling, this is what's happening, this is what's surfacing. And for men, it's, oh, good, we're getting through, we're figuring it out. And there is this, even, in intimate friendships I have with men, there is this posturing and posing that we do. And it's hard to get vulnerable. And I'm not sitting here saying that I'm great at it. I'm sitting here saying that I'm working on it, like you are working on it. And that's part of it, is just to talk about that, right? Our struggle with being honest in the moment. I'm scared. I'm really concerned. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do this, And part of that check-in is to check in and see how we're doing in coping. And are we taking out our frustrations on the people around us? And if you're social isolating with, again, your wife, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your children, how can I catch myself when am I taking it out on them? Am I using them as an emotional punching bag, or, just as worse or even worse, as a physical punching bag? So I'm not saying that all men are violent, and I'm not saying that all of you are going to resort to emotional, verbal abuse or physical abuse, but I think it's important to catch ourselves before we go down that slope. I was saying before, I'm just waiting for all the Shining memes and references to come through. The concept of Jack being isolated in that hotel with his wife and son, and slowly, the walls sinking in. And I grew up in a home of abuse, and so I know what it's like to feel, in my case, as a little boy, I could feel my father's rage in the other room. He wasn't yelling or anything. I could just sense it, that it was building. And I think we need to talk about that. Talk about, as men, what we do in those moments. So I had these two talks. And the first one in the morning was with, again, the Catholic Family Services Children Aid Society frontline workers. So these are folks who support survivors, or supporting women and children who are fleeing violence, escaping violence, navigating violence. But what they also do is not the main focus of the work, but what they do as a result is they're also navigating the men in these situations. So it's the fathers, husbands, partners who have caused harm or are causing harm, who have resorted to violence or are being violent, right? So I went to do a talk in the morning. It was an all-day training they were doing, how to engage and inspire men to do better and towards change when they've been violent. And during the opening session, they talked about, who are the clients, right? So women are the clients of the violence against women sector. Children are the clients of Children Aid Society. So the speaker was like, who are the men clients of? And the frontline workers, one of them yelled out, the police. And there was laughter. And I think that's a justified righteous anger, right? Or laughter. But clearly comes from a place of, these folks are doing that hard work, showing up and having to deal with the repercussions and the impact that these men are having when they're not able to navigate what's surfacing for them, and they resort to violence as a solution. So I talked with them about men and manhood, how we create our ideas of manhood, and the conditions that create our ideas of manhood. So, this idea of men being in control, not needing help, and how we create this idea of men as being, again, having the answers, being the solution, and anything less than that is soft or weak or feminine. So, as a result of that, a lot of men, we become emotionally stunted. Like, there's a period where we just cut off our emotional literacy, our empathy, our ability to express a full range of emotions. There's over 6,000 words in the English language that describe emotion. How many of those are women and girls allowed to express, and how many of those are men and boys allowed to express? If you identify as a man, a young man, a boy, the amount of emotions you can express becomes very narrow. Usually it's things around being aggressive or what's seen as like manly traits, right? Things like love and empathy are slowly discouraged. And it's not all men, obviously, but it becomes harder and harder for men to be authentic. And what we learn to do is we kind of suppress expressing emotion. And then what that means is that leads to us not being able to handle or deal with in a healthy way, channel our emotion. What also happens is that, there's a moment where there's a wound, there's a trauma wound, there's some sort of incident that happens, and that stunts our emotional literacy. So we are stuck at the age of our wound. So when we're 15, when we're 10, when we're 5, something happens, our emotional literacy, the development kind of stops there, and our fluency is just stuck in that kind of language range. If that makes sense. So it's the idea of wounds creating other wounds, and how we pass down these traditions of manhood and how that impacts men, but how it impacts people of other genders, and thinking of women and young women, And so in talking about that and about ways that we can, as men, be part of a solution, and that is how we can look out for one another and build community amongst men. And part of that is leaning on each other as men, learning to open up and be vulnerable and be in a moment and speak to what's happening, learning to develop the skill set, and doing that work as men with other men. That hard, heavy lifting when it comes to the hard conversations that we need to have, and how we can model that to each other, And it's not that you have to be perfect or be a model of perfection. You're modeling that you're trying. You're trying to figure it out. You're trying to get it right. I'll talk more about models and examples in a minute. But the women that I talked to were very moved by the conversation. They recognize that this is a big part of the work, right? Is how we get men to really learn to kind of navigate what they're dealing with and how to deal with it in a healthy way. Afterwards, a bunch of the frontline workers, the women, came up to me to ask me questions, and one of them said, like when I'm working with a man or is talking to a man, and I want to leave him with tips on how, like, what are your ideas around tips to de-escalate? So, you find yourself angry. The idea is to leave the room, count to 10, these different things. I said to her, before, as men, before we even do that, like when I tell men that, as I'm maybe saying that for you yourself listening, what is happening for you? Like, what are you feeling? There's this moment where we need to acknowledge what's happening. So I can be in a room and I'm with my partner and we're arguing and I'm getting angry and it's just really escalating, right? So it's figuring out, well, what do I do with that anger? What do I do with that in that moment? It's acknowledging, right? Acknowledging that that's happening. Acknowledging that's in real time. What am I feeling? What's coming up for me right now? And then I think about, well, what are the barriers for men that get in the way of us having that moment? And what gets in the way of us hearing, for example, this idea of here's some tips, here's some things that you can do, de-escalate, count to 10, exhale, leave the room. The things that get in the way for men that become activated or kind of come to the surface. Why are we being activated? Why are we getting angry? What's happening with it right now for me? It's fear. Maybe it's shame. Maybe it's a concern about the moment and not being enough, and just everything's coming to a head, right? So there's the concern of consequences that comes up as well for men. So when we're in that place of shame over what's happening in this moment, I'm not enough, or I can't handle this right now, I can't talk about this right now, that feeling can lead to us being very dangerous in that moment, right? Because when we are in shame, when we're angry, in our minds, we are made to feel small. And the idea, like, for men, it's about power, about holding power, demonstrating power. And that's our measure. is the power that we hold, that we can prove, that we can demonstrate. And if I'm made to feel powerless, I feel less as a man because it's so tied to my identity and self worth. So, so when in my mind, I'm made to feel small, I become very dangerous over the people I hold power over. Because if I hold power over you, I'm going to try to feel better by using you, right? So if I'm an angry boss, I hold power over my employees and maybe I'll take it out on them. But in the household, if I hold in a place of rage, I can hold power over my partner or my children. And that can be verbal abuse. I use them as a verbal punching bag. And the not maybe not worse than, because just it can be just as impactful, but even worse, a verbal than a verbal punching bag is a actual punching bag, and using them as as an outlet for my violence. So it's recognizing that as men we need to recognize where we need tools to cope, that it's okay to ask for help. And part of that, before any of that, again, it's about being able to acknowledge what's happening, being present to what's happening. And part of that is having the language or a skill set to be able to acknowledge what's happening. It's about having, again, that emotional literacy that I'm able to identify and name the things that are happening. I can recognize this is what's happening and I can name it. Sitting in the moment, right? What am I feeling right now? What is that? So it's being able to name it and identify it. So when I'm able to identify what what am I really feeling right now? What's really happening for me right now? Because if you've ever been angry or in a real rage, it's like twice in my life I've been so angry that it's like in the cartoons where everything's blurry. That kind of rage, it is, you can't think straight, see straight. So if you recognize you're in that moment, how we can program ourselves to kind of think, what am I feeling right now? What's happening? What's surfacing? How do I learn to identify those things? So we can learn to identify what's happening. Do that inner work. That's something you do in talking with a professional, talking with your male friends, maybe even talking with your partner, but again, not relying on her or him to do all that work for you, but working with you to kind of name those things. I remember there's a hip hop artist named KRS One, the legendary KRS One. I went to see him give a lecture in Toronto, and he talked about this. He talked about language and how when we develop language, it's very powerful because now we have a name for things. So when you're a kid, you learn what, for example, like what a wall is. The first time someone explains to you, this is what a wall is, and you learn that a wall is made of drywall or it's made of, brick or stone. So you learn what the wall does, and you learn what it does to you and what it does for you. So a wall might, you know, contain you. What a wall can do is it's something that you can lean on it. You can put your things on it, like the painting or a framed picture. It might make you feel claustrophobic if there's a bunch of walls. It might make you feel good to have some personal private space. So when I'm able to identify something, I have language. If I have language around my emotions and I'm able to name, this is the emotion I'm feeling. I'm feeling pressure. I'm afraid. Here's what it's doing to me. Here's what it does to me and what it does in general. It helps us. So I'll give you an example here. I want to talk to you a bit about Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Now, if you don't know, Justin Trudeau's wife, Sophie, was traveling overseas and came back home and was, I'm sorry, I'm touching my face all the time at home. I'm really trying not to do it when I'm out, but when I'm at home, I'm touching my damn face. But hey, I am Lysoling my face 24/7, believe me. But anyway, so yeah, speaking of being careful, Sophie Trudeau was diagnosed as having the COVID-19 virus, and so she is self quarantined. And because Justin Trudeau and the kids live with her, they're all doing the 14-day quarantine. And so they are living inside the official residence for the Prime Minister in Ottawa, Canada. And what they've been doing is, because this crisis is happening, they're doing. Oh, that's my kitten. Can you hear my kitten? Oh gosh, poor baby. I gotta let her out. You hang tight there. You hang tight. Anyway, so they're doing the press conferences, these really important updates about what's happening with coronavirus in Canada. You know, again, the whole nation, right? There's a press conference, the Prime Minister speaking, the eyes of 30 plus million people, because it affects all of them. They're listening, they're watching. So he does these literally in front of the House. And so he did one the other day, and I'm going to play for you some video of something that happened, because he had to, well, I'll just show you.
I'm supposed to model healthy behavior. I'm going to go grab my coat, and I'll be right back. Okay, so smart idea for the Prime Minister to go get his coat. I'm not sure what the temperature is, Glenn McGregor, you're there, but here he comes. That's quick. The coat, obviously, right there in the front door. Prime Minister coming back again, an $82 billion announcement. It's a little brisk.
So that's, true to what happened was he's like, just before we get to the questions, I'm supposed to be modeling healthy behavior. So I'm going to go grab my coat and I'll be right back. So a little sheepishly, he turns around, takes a few seconds, goes back. Some people made fun of him for doing that. And it is a moment of like, bro, what are you doing, man? Like, the whole nation is awaiting to ask you questions and like get some understanding what's going on. But in that moment, this is part of that, an example of they're outside. It's March. It's probably a little chilly. And he just given a statement. And he is, he's quarantined. Maybe he has it as well. Maybe he's fighting a cold. And there is this performance piece of like, I don't want to alarm people by being like, I'm actually trying to fight a cold right now. So, but at the same time, he models vulnerability, because in the moment he says, what's happening for me right now? I'm cold. I need a jacket. That will make me warm. I'm doing a press conference in front of the world. But I'm going to pause this and go get my coat and come right back. So in the moment, he's able to name what's happening and take that moment to resolve it. Now, when you're a kid, sometimes kids run around and like running around without a jacket, or they're running around with their jacket open. And, dad or mom or someone is like, hey, put your scarf on, put your hat on, get your mittens, zip up your coat. Like, you got to like bundle up. And the kid learns to understand that when I feel this, I need to do something about it. So he develops, or she develops, or they develop that understanding of what to do, a routine around what to do. So to me, that's modeling strength. But for some people, that was seen as a bit of a joke. Like, come on, be a man. Stand out there in the cold. Like, you're Canadian, for God's sake, right? But the point is, I think he modeled, like he said, healthy behavior, taking care of yourself. So it's really funny when you think about leaders and modeling leadership. And not that Trudeau is a perfect example of a leader. He's complicated and all these things. But the dude down south is the televangelist of toxic ideas of manhood, right? Donald Trump. And so for him, he is all about the appearance of strength, the impression that he has strength, rather than actual strength. It's just about projecting it. So for him, it's not about being perceived as weak, right? We're talking about this idea of manhood. So I want to read to you, this is a article in the Washington Post that came out March 12th, how Trump refused to admit mistakes that may have exacerbated Europe's frustrations. One of the less commented upon mistakes that Trump made in his speech about the coronavirus Wednesday was a bit of a verbal stumble. This is the most aggressive and comprehensive effort to confront a foreign virus in modern history, Trump said near the outset of his remarks. I'm confident that by counting and continuing to take these tough measures will significantly reduce the threat to our citizens and will ultimately and expeditiously defeat the virus. So I messed that up, and I even in real time I kind of went, I'm sorry. But what Trump was supposed to say, you could imagine them in the remarks was, I'm confident that by continuing to take these tough measures will significantly blah blah blah. But he misread it, and he said, I'm confident that by counting and continuing. So you might notice he does this all the time, where he'll say something, and like he'll misread the teleprompter. And I think what's happening, because I know he wears reading glasses, I think he just needs glasses because he's always, he's like, and what he's doing is he's squinting, and he's trying to, so he's like, that tough guy look. But what he's doing is squinting because he probably can't read the teleprompter well enough, even though they make it like a large print. So he'll mess up, and he'll say something wrong, and he'll kind of, rather than go, sorry, what I meant to say was bah, because that's weakness, right? He's got to show strength. I don't make mistakes. I don't admit to mistakes. I'm always accountable. So the article in the Post continues. Trump's speeches for the network. Notice the lengthy aside apparently spurred by misreading the teleprompter during the president's speech at the Conservative Political Action Conference, CPAC, last month. Trump's prepared remarks almost certainly had him saying, we understand that our first duty and highest loyalty is to the American citizens. But he instead said, we understand that our first lady and highest, then he catches himself. Instead of saying first duty, he said first lady. So he just riffs rather than acknowledge. He goes, we understand that our first lady and highest, and you have to remember, when our first lady came out, she said to me today, say hello to everybody. And she said, that's your first duty and highest loyalty. And this was coming right from her to the American citizens. So he kind of he refuses to ever admit to accountability, right? And just admit, whoops, because for him, that's weakness. That I need help is weakness. That I made a mistake is weakness. It's strength. That is strength. What is weakness is to continue to try to fool others, but really fooling yourself. Being a man is about accountability. It's OAR, or accountability, ownership, accountability, responsibility, or that's what being a man is. That's real strength. That's true strength. And I think of Justin Trudeau. There's another clip I want to show you of him talking about this issue, right? Because right now, I think there are a lot of people that, not a lot, hopefully not a lot, there are going to be a number of people that are going to be in a situation where they're like, oh, my partner is driving me up the wall. And that's one thing. But the other end of that spectrum can go from, the everyday kind of wrestling with, living with someone, and what is naturally going to happen. There can be fights and disagreements, but then the people who don't have the tools to cope and the tools to acknowledge what's happening and to work through what's happening with their partner, getting help from friends, professional help if they need that. So Justin Trudeau talked about in his speech, part of the thing they're going to do is to boost funding for shelters.
For anyone fleeing domestic or gender-based violence, we will boost funding for shelters that provide sanctuary when self-isolating at home is simply not an option. For anyone
so, I just want to take a moment here to, if you feel like, you need to talk to someone, I'm saying right here that I'm willing to talk to you. So my DMs are open in Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Jeff Perera, JEFFPERERA. If you ever need to talk, I'm not a professional. There are ways you can get help and ask for help and part of that is admitting, and like we're talking about, learning to recognize in you when you need help and you need to ask for help and reaching out. So if you need to talk, I'm here to support men in just having someone to talk to. So message me and I'll try to create space to we can get on FaceTime or a phone call or whatever. If you are someone who's experiencing violence, in Canada, the Canadian Women's Foundation has a great resource online. It's canadianwomen.org/support dash survivors, support services, sorry. You can Google all these things, obviously, to find the supports for you. But again, Canadian Women's Foundation in Canada is canadianwomen.org/support dash services. And that's national, provincial, territories, resources and supports. For those of you in the States and around the world, you know, get on Google, your search engine, look up spaces to support you if you are wrestling with handling and coping, and if you are someone who is experiencing violence. We're thinking of all of you. You're not alone. Let's talk, guys. Let's support one another. And I'm not saying that, you know, we're all going to become violent. I mean, let's just check in with each other. Let's support one another and just say, hey, how's it going? Like, really, how's it going? One of the things that really boosts my spirits is more and more people, when we, you know, these days, when we say, how are you doing? Like, we really mean it, you know? And I think that's part of building community. We need to build community more than ever. Let's take these lessons forward of how we're checking in with each other, talking to one another, looking after one another. How can I support? How can I give? This is one way I want to try to do that is, again, not an expert, not a professional. I'm not a perfect man. I'm not the evolved male. I'm just a guy like you. I'm trying to figure this out, but I'm here to, you're not alone in that journey, right? Let's talk and talk with the men in your life. If you go on Huffington Post, I wrote a piece about the hardest words for men to say to the men is I love you. So if you look up why I love you is a muscle that men need to flex every day, saying I love you to other men. Look up that piece. And also, if you're interested in the Unshakable Man podcast, I talked with Mike Sagana, the Unshakable Man podcast, talking about this idea of men developing connection between one another. It's so important now more than ever that we take care of each other. So, yeah, I don't know what's going to happen moving forward, but you're not alone. We are not alone. We have each other. So let's look out for one another. I love you all, and maybe I'll talk to you, or maybe I'll catch you online.